Yay, Worldbuilding channel! You might be asking yourself, why is she wearing that beautiful dress? Does it have something to do with conlanging? Would wearing a beautiful dress make me a better conlanger? The answer is no. Hi, if you don't know me and you've stumbled upon this video randomly, my name is Mariah Patty, and I have another channel that has slowly become a historical sewing channel. I'm currently working on transferring over some of my old videos, world building videos, to this new channel. Some of the old videos are pretty good, some are really bad, but I want to preserve them in a way that allows me to also update them. So you're about to see the unedited version of my first ever attempt at conlanging, which was published in October of 2018. If it gets to be too awful for you, feel free to skip ahead to this timestamp to see what my conlanging looks like now in March of 2021. I know that policing comments is impossible, but just so that you're aware, the original video did have a comment section, and when you're watching the old video of this one, please keep in mind that any critique you come up with I've probably already read. However, I would love and appreciate any criticism you have to offer on my current conlanging. Okay, let's do this. This is one of the bad ones. I have not watched this one since I put it up.
Hello, my name is Mariah and I really need a break from sewing, so I decided to make a language. In doing research, I was really intrigued by the Thai language because of the style. The race of people in my world building project that I am creating this for live near the ocean and are very connected to the water, so I really like the idea of characters that included waves and little curlicues and lots of just flowing swirls. I love the look of languages that use characters, but I knew that making an actual logography was completely out of the question because, you know, it's just too many characters and I've never even made one of these before. Time to learn, but that's probably not the best one to learn on. So a syllabary combines the best of both worlds because you get the look of characters, but you're only making, 100 of them instead of, say, 5,000. I also want to clearly differentiate it from the other language that I'll be creating for my world building project later on, which is going to use an alphabet and be a lot more Roman looking in general. Okay, let's get started. In the English language, we have 5 vowels that combine different ways to give you a multitude of sounds. I'm going to use A, E, I, O, and U, and later I decided to add an EI combination because I realized I didn't have quite enough sounds. The thing about syllabaries is you need to keep it limited or else it's going to get out of control. So I limited it just to 6 vowels. The A makes an A as in father. The E is a soft E as in elephant. The I is a hard E like pepperoni. The O is a hard O like cozy. The U is a double O like pool, and the EI is a long A like in freight. Next, you have to decide what consonant sounds you're going to use. I found it best to determine this through a process of elimination, so I wrote them all out and then started weeding through to figure out which ones could accomplish multiple jobs. I decided almost immediately to get rid of the C and just use the K for both of its jobs. Then I got rid of the P and the V. Now both of those sounds, P and V, will be softened into a B. Since I'm combining as few consonants as possible, I definitely need to keep the F. Any F sound will come through the F. Now this one's a bit risky. I want to get rid of the S entirely and only use Z sounds with the Z. This is risky because every language in the world has the A, S, and N sound in common. To get rid of it is a little bit unnatural. I'm also going to get rid of the X because I'm planning on the other language I create relying more heavily on the X, and I don't want to overuse it, especially since I'm going to be using a lot of Z's. I also want to get rid of the G. There isn't a good replacement for it, but I think the closest will be the D sound. G, D, G, D. It's not perfect, but I think it'll work well enough. I'm also going to get rid of the Y. It can be used as a Y or as a vowel sound. I don't need it as a vowel sound, but if I need it for the Y sound, I'll use the W. W, Y. And I'm going to get rid of the Q. I have a plan to replace it when I get to the consonant combos. The J I have another plan for as well, so it can go too. And there we have it. I've narrowed it down to 12 basic consonants to use. For a syllabary, this is still a little bit much, but it'll be fine. Now it's time to start working out the consonant combinations. I'm going to do this similar to the consonants in that I'm going to list out every one that I can think of and then start weeding out what I think are the most important, the most versatile, and irreplaceable. This is pretty easy to do. Just start by taking the first letter and sound it out aloud to see how well it works with the other letters. Don't be afraid to break what you think sounds right according to the rules of your native language because you're trying to make a completely unique fictional language, and there are some sounds that can be different. Okay, now that I've got a good list to choose from, I'm going to start sorting through and cutting down this list of combinations. I'm going to cut out the BH, the BK, the BW, and the whole row of D combinations. I'm left with 13 combinations. Bull, full, cull, tull, burr, fur, cur, tur. The KH I'm going to use for the purpose of the CH in English, so that's going to sound like a ch. The TH is going to sound the same as the TH in English, so it'll be th. The KW is going to replace the QU sound in English, so it'll be qua. The TW will be twa, and the TZ will be similar to the TS sound in some Asian languages, so it'll be ts, ts. Alright, now it gets fun. I looked at the Thai language for some inspiration for the 12 consonant sounds and the 6 vowel sounds. It's important to note that at this point I put the Thai alphabet away. It's good to get inspiration from outside sources, but you don't want to rely on it too heavily or you won't exercise your creativity as much as you can. Now it's time to create characters for your constant combinations. What I did is bring together the 2 characters that I adapted from the Thai language for the consonants and combine them into a new unique character, replacing the individual characters. Then I repeated this process with the rest of the 13 consonant combinations. Now I'm ready to start the intense part. I need to take all 12 consonants plus all 13 combinations and multiply that by 6 vowel options, and I have to take those elements and come up with 155 unique characters. Okay, speed round. Ba, da, fa, ha, ka, la, ma, na, ra, ta, wa, za, bla, bra, fla, fra, cha, cla, cra, qua, tha, fla, thra, thwa, tsa. On to E and DI. Be, bay, de, day, fe, fe, he, hey, ke, ke, le, lay, me, may, ne, nay, re, ray, te, tay, we, way, ze, zay, ble, blay, bre, bray, fle, flay, fre, fray, che, che, cle, clay, cre, cray, que, quay, the, thay, tle, tlay, tre, tray, twe, tway, dze, dzay. On to the I's. B, D, fi, he, ki, li, mi, ni, ri, ti, we, z, blee, bree, flee, free, chi, clee, cree, qui, thee, tlee, tree, twee, tsi. And O's. Bo, do, fo, ho, ko, lo, mo, no, ro, to, wo, zo, blow, bro, flow, fro, cho, clo, crow, quo, tho, tlo, tro, two, tso. And finally the U's. Boo, do, foo, who, coo, loo, moo, new, roo, to, woo, zoo, blue, baru, flu, fru, chew, clue, crew, quo, thu, tlu, true, twu, tsu. And there it is, the full chart of 155 calligraphic characters. If you liked this video, feel free to subscribe. There will be a follow-up where I go into the process of how I take these individual characters and begin to develop the set of rules for word construction, testing it out first as a naming language before I get into the hardcore work of developing grammar and a lexicon. Thanks. Bye.
God damn, that was bad.
Okay, that was painful. Oh, geez. Okay, one, you gotta love the, very authoritative, this is how you do this kind of tone. Yeah, that was something. And it just kept going. Okay. I'm really glad I never made that follow-up. I drew pretty characters. I wanted to make a video about them. I didn't know what I was talking about. Okay, so the backstory of this video is that back when my main channel only had my first few videos up and almost 0 views, I uploaded this video randomly and it did comparatively well. It was my first video to break 1,000 views, even though it is awful. And it did really set a path for me to use videos to develop, organize, and express world building ideas in the future. So I don't regret making this video, I just hate the video. My main problem isn't even the ideas, it was how I explained the ideas. I didn't understand linguistics and conlanging vocabulary well enough to correctly define my goals, and I don't think I even understood what I was trying to do until much later when I watched this video about naming places in your world building. That's when I realized that I was never trying to make an actual conlang, all I was really aiming for was a naming language, which one, I didn't really understand the difference at the time, and also I just wanted to draw a pretty squiggly script. And that really threw people off. So Christmas 2018, my friend Anna gave me the art of language invention as a gift, and that's when I realized that I'd approached the steps to conlanging almost completely backwards. So yes, for a while after that, and based off of all of the criticism I got off the video, I did spend a good amount of time working on a better conlang for the Nauticans, but eventually I realized that conlanging just really isn't my thing. I'm more of a visual world builder. I guess that's why I started with the script before the language. And if I was world building purely for its own sake, I wouldn't bother naming anything. But now I make videos, and I share my ideas, and I write, so hey, names are useful. It has been 2.5 whole years since I originally made the video and promised a follow-up, and it would be much too long and boring to track every step forward and every step back I've made since then. So instead, I'll just show you what my current approach to conlanging is. I should mention, even though these new re-uploads are going to go through comment sections, I'm not going to do that with this video because that original video is the only video where I've actually deleted the whole comment section. And that's because there comes a point when constructive criticism is just no longer constructive, and after the video was over a year old, it became distracting and needlessly discouraging to still get regular comments on it that all said basically the same thing. This sucks, it's too Englishy, it's pronounced consonant, not consonant, and learn IPA. So for my new conlangs, let me first clearly define my goals. I never intend to develop them into speakable languages. I only want to name characters, name locations, and name basic words. I do not care about grammar or sentence structure or any of the little details that make for a technically good conlang.
Technically good.
But now that I'm actually making progress in my writing, I needed a usable naming language framework. I also still intend to use pretty much only English sounds. A lot of people really didn't like that in the last video and called it too Englishy and unnaturalistic. Let me be very clear. You are correct. I just don't care. As I've already said, I don't care about conlanging for its own sake. I'm only naming things for the purpose of writing in my books that I am writing in English to be read in English. I need the words I write to be relatively easy and intuitive for my audience to read, so I don't really care about the languages being naturalistic. And yes, I'm going to stick with English sounds. People are reading it in English. So in my world, there are 3 languages that matter. 3 that are primarily referenced and that need to interact and contrast well with each other for the purposes of writing. They are called Nautican, Simonen, and Avian. I made a chart of every English sound I want to include, but I don't want to use all of them in every language. It will help the words sound distinct from each other if I narrow and limit the range of sounds allowed in each of the 3 languages. Next, I decided what letters and spellings I wanted to use to express each sound. The important thing to me was that they still needed to be close enough to English that a range of readers could look at the same word word and come up with at least similar pronunciations. It doesn't have to be perfect, and I don't have infinite control, because once people read a word and decide on their own pronunciation, it usually sticks with them and it develops kind of a personal meaning to them that the author can't simply change later. So how I spell a word is my only chance to hopefully present something that looks distinct and beautiful on paper, but will be pronounced at least close to how I intended it to be. The Simonen language is spoken by a range of people who are most similar to humans, and thus I wanted this language to be the most familiar to an English speaker, but maybe with an old world classical vibe. So I chose Greek for a lot of my inspiration in what letters and spellings to use. I kept the vowels pretty basic and consistent with English, but I eliminated Y as any kind of vowel sound, and instead I used a lot of vowel combinations that we do see in English, but maybe I'll use them a bit more heavily here. For the consonants, I also kept reasonably close to English with a few distinctions. I eliminated F and chose to express the sound with PH instead. I also allowed the k sound to be spelled with K's or C's, but I got rid of any Q's. For the z sound, I will allow some Z's, but I want to rely heavier on X's, and I'm going to use XH for the zh sound. I'm going to limit the qu sound as I can't use QU, and I want to reserve the KW spelling. The consonant clusters box is empty for this language because I only intend to use consonant clusters that are already common with English. Now, the Nautican language is meant to sound a lot more foreign. Even though I've mostly moved away from the ideas presented in the original video, I liked the clipped sound the short syllables gave the words I did make. I like the idea of constructing the words with a mostly consonant-vowel format, though with some room for variation. For this language, I heavily restricted the vowel sounds allowed. The only vowel combination I allowed is AI, which is one of the few combinations I restricted from the Simonen chart. For the consonants, the changes I made were to eliminate the Y entirely. I restricted the k sound to K's only. For the s sound, I decided to eliminate it and replace it with Z's. I know this is a bit unnatural, but it's also visually distinct, and making the Nautican language a bit unnatural works for the vibe I'm after. Since I have no S's, I decided to replace any sh sound with a zh sound instead. I will eliminate ch, and the zh sound I'll express with a zh, which might not be the most intuitive, but I don't think it's unreasonable. And the qu sound will be expressed with a kw. The only consistent consonant clusters I've allowed for are kw, kh, which to me is a heavier sounding k, and tz, which is not exactly an English sound, but it's a twist on ts, which shouldn't be too great of a reach. All of this makes Nautican my most limited language, but I like it. One problem I did see with the consonant-vowel pairings is that I was starting to pronounce words in a monotone, and I was having trouble figuring out where the stress should be. So I decided to allow the use of accent marks in Nautican, and to keep accent marks mostly exclusive to Nautican to help with the distinction. I know I keep harping on distinction, but to me it's very important, because I'm not writing full sentences in these languages, only single words and names spread out over the course of a story. So I want it to be fairly easy for a reader to interpret which language a name originates from, and to do that I need an exaggeratedly consistent sense of distinction for each language. My third language is the Avian language. I have many avian races and subspecies in my world, and they are all spread out enough that the Avian language should technically have many different accents and dialects, and even off-branching languages in the more remote avian cultures. However, for the purpose of naming things, I think treating all of the avian dialects as one language will work well enough, at least for now. The inspiration for the look of this language came from this Navajo dictionary that I have. I was struck by the profuse use of doubled vowels. The words looked very intriguing and beautiful and distinct to me, and a lot of my avian cultures have some level of Native American inspiration, or at least similarities, so it kind of works. For the vowels, I opened back up most of the sounds, but I decided to express them only in single vowels or doubled vowels or vowels paired with Y. No other vowel combinations allowed, and some vowel pronunciations may be spelled multiple ways, depending on how I like the look of the words on paper. For my consonants, I've also opened that mostly up. I decided to express the k sound only with C's and Q's, but leaning heavier on the Q's, which will also help it contrast with the Nautican, which relies heavily on K's. I restored the S to its normal position, and to contrast the heavy Z use in Nautican, I eliminated Z's and swapped them with S's in Avian. I'll spell the zh sound with a J, and I brought back the qu sound as a QU. This language will also have a lot of unusual consonant clusters. I did find that some of my avian words were starting to look a bit long and clunky, so I decided to allow for a lot of hyphenated two-part words, which could be interpreted as a glottal stop, or just used to break up the words and make them more intuitive to pronounce. Avian is the only language that gets hyphens as a visual distinction. Okay, phew, that was a lot. But now we get to make words. The best part about this system as a writer is how easy it makes it to twist the spelling slightly on a word, but still allow it to be recognizable. For example, I decided to name my world Tehom after the Hebrew word for the abyss. Depending on the race of the character speaking, I can spell that T-A-E, T-A-I, or T-A-Y. These spellings are only slightly different, and no reader should be confused as to what the word is referring. But it almost infuses the written word with something like an accent. Sometimes it has a greater effect. I can spell avian as avian, avian, or avian. And these are still decipherable as the same word, but the pronunciation changes just slightly. Nautican can be spelled Nautican, Nautican, or Nautican. Shakoba, goddess of flight, might be called Shakoba in Simonen, Jikoba by the Nauticans, or Shakoba by the Avians. Basic words such as mommy and daddy might be spelled ama and ada, ama and ada, or ama and ata. I want them to be familiar enough, but still clearly distinct from each other. Now, what are my strategies for coming up with names? I have a few, but the thing is I kind of hate made-up words. That was my problem with conlanging. I'd get to a point where I would just look at it all and be like, this is just a bunch of made-up words. They didn't have any meaning besides what I'd written down. I love names that have real-world connections and depth and meaning. The easiest way I have to come up with a name I like is to twist the spelling of a familiar English word or name. Nautican was originally a twisted spelling of nautical. An English reader shouldn't have trouble recognizing the roots behind Nautican, and then won't be surprised that Nauticans have something to do with the ocean. I filtered bird names through my Avian sound chart to come up with the name Quailian, and I'm not 100% happy with that one. But the same method made very interesting names for some of the other avian races I've been working on. Egalian, Falcion, Alberosi, Julian, Cormorian, Rayfian, and others. If you're in on the trick, it won't be hard to identify the origin, but the casual reader might not pick up on them, especially if the words Falcion and Falcon never appear on the same page together. Another method I use is to twist the spelling of a word that has meaning to me, even if not the general public. I have used this to discreetly name characters after a lot of my friends. For example, my sister, Michaela Simone, is a deaf educator, so I named the goddess of communication after her, and naturally the common language is named for the goddess of communication and is called Simonen. There's also a meaning to me for why my conworld is named after the Hebrew word for the abyss. Now, if an avian refers to their enemy as a harpy, they might not mean it literally, but to me there is a greater depth to the insult, and even if a reader isn't aware of that depth, they will be able to readily grasp that it is a bad thing because of the cultural connection to the well-known myth. This isn't really about coming up with objectively good names, just names that I am satisfied with and that I take joy in seeing on paper. And my third method is to adapt words from other languages into names. This is the method that I have to be most careful about and make sure that I'm primarily adapting them for the purpose of naming, not conlanging, because otherwise you'll wind up with a highly derivative conlang. But for characters especially, I love the multiple levels of depth you can give a name. It does work for nouns, but I try to be a bit more creative if I'm going to adapt existing words from real languages. For example, I've used a lot of Navajo inspiration in my avian language and names. When naming their houses, I looked up the Navajo word for a home, but then I changed course and looked up the word for a bird's nest, and decided to call avian houses bateaux instead. Two of my very most special Quailian characters are named Ahachi and Bitakilto. The name Ahachi comes from the Navajo word for anger. Bitakilto, usually called Kilto, was drawn from a phrase meaning this bird has a broken wing. To me, personally, I will never have the same level of emotional connection with a made-up word as I do with a name that has real-world significance behind it. I have also employed this method a bit with the other languages, using primarily Greek words to come up with Simonen names, such as a character named Thiel after the Greek word for a tempest. And I've begun to use Thai inspiration for Nautican. I realized I had a lot of coincidental Thai inspiration in the Nauticans, so I decided to make those coincidences into a pattern. Anyways, there is a lot more we could get into, but for now this is enough. This was meant to be an update on my conlanging adventures, and now you know roughly where I'm at. Maybe in a future video we can get into more of the actual words and names in the three languages, but of course all things grow and evolve, so who knows where I'll be in 2 years.